But when I was a teenager, I loved basketball. I loved playing basketball. I loved watching basketball, collecting basketball cards, whatever I could possibly do. The problem is, of course, Nashville does not have an NBA team. But when I was a kid, I remember being about 12, 13 years old, and it just so happened that a preseason NBA game came to Nashville, Vanderbilt Arena. What's it called? Rupp Arena. Is that wrong? There you go, Memorial Gym. The one that's curiously a little bit higher, the floor is a little bit higher than it should be. So I went to this game so excited. This preseason meant absolutely nothing to any of the players. But I went, and of course the seats that I had were not great. They were in the nosebleed section. But of course it wasn't completely sold out, so waited a little while, and a friend that was with me. And about second quarter, we saw right about third row, 2 seats that were open. I was like, let's go see if we can get down there. So we walk down and we, make our way and act, it's like 12, 13-year-olds, and we're supposed to be doing this. Make our way down and sit in those seats, and we just thought we had made it. This was the most incredible experience of our lives. We could just, feel the sweat was just, getting thrown off into our faces. It was so exciting. Of course, what happens? Another 5 minutes go by, and 2 very nicely dressed gentlemen come down, and they get to the row, and they said, I think those are our seats. And of course, we try to play it off. We get our tickets. Oh, yes, you're right. Turns out I'm way up there. How foolish of me. My mistake. So then we stand up, and of course, you have to, it's bad because everybody's looking, right? It's like all 20,000 people are looking at. And the walk of shame happens. The walk of shame is you traipse back up into the upper deck. It was a terrible feeling. Jesus tells a story in our gospel reading this morning that sort of, kind of sets that stage. Before I get into that, I'll kind of talk a little bit about the setting here. Jesus is eating at the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees. Of course, the Pharisees were, for all intents and purposes, the religious gatekeepers. They had the keys to the kingdom. They were the ones that interpreted Scripture. They were the ones that knew the law like the back of their hand. They were the ones that told you how to keep the law. Incredibly important individuals. And this was not only the house of one of the Pharisees, but one of the rulers of the Pharisees, one of the bosses to the Pharisees. And those in attendance most likely were probably, scribes and Pharisees. They were probably also, everybody sort of maybe a little bit on edge, right? If you get invited to your boss's house for a dinner, you're going to go, you're not going to try your best not to make an idiot of yourself, right? You're going to try not to make a fool of yourself as you are sitting there with your boss. So it's interesting, we don't get this, we just get the first verse, and then it skips on down to verse 7. But between the verses 2 through 6, Jesus asks them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? And it says everybody's silent. And I think that silence is because nobody wants to speak up. None of these Pharisees, it's like asking a group of priests a theological question when the bishop is in the room, right? Nobody really wants to jump at the answer. So everybody's silent. There's a man that is there that Jesus healed. And in the context that he asks him another question. If any of you have an animal, a donkey or a horse, and it falls into a ditch on the Sabbath, what are you going to do? Are you not going to pull it out? And again, he asks this question and everybody is silent. So in other words, would you let your love for rules and tradition override your humanity and your compassion? That's really what he's asking. Aren't the needs of people more important than keeping the letter of the law? So the assumption here is that everybody in this room would protect their investment if it was the Sabbath day. They don't want to lose value on something that they bought. They paid all this money for a donkey or a horse. They're not going to let it, die in the ditch just because it's the Sabbath day. How much more are the needs of your fellow human beings? How much more important are they than a piece of property, an animal? Why wouldn't they have the same sense of urgency when seeing one of their fellow men suffer? So that's the context. That sets us up. That's what happens in verses 2 through 6. And Jesus is highlighting the fact that these men were all too often more concerned with keeping the law than they were for the men and women around them. So rigidly keeping the law that they could actually cause harm to those around them. Position and power meant more to them than compassion and justice. So again, look at the passage here in Luke 14. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places. And just before that, it says that they watched him closely. He was attending this banquet. He was probably the guy that didn't belong. He's not a Pharisee. He's not a scribe. He's sort of the outcast. This young kind of rogue preacher. He's not one of us. So when he attends this feast, all eyes are on him. But it says he tells this parable because he was watching them. He was paying attention to them. He probably saw them jockeying for position at the table, all wanting to get the best seat to prove their prominence and to maybe get some face time with their boss. Jesus sees this and gives them what I think is actually a pretty practical lesson, more than an abstract parable. Oftentimes, Jesus tells parables and they are stories, kind of abstract stories that don't necessarily, you have to think a little bit to get the spiritual application. I think these two back-to-back, messages that Jesus has in this passage, it's pretty cut and dry, right? You don't really have to think about it. Don't try and force yourself into a place of prominence that you don't in fact have. Don't jockey for position just to exalt yourself. It's much better to be exalted from a place of humility than to be cast down in shame from a place that you don't belong. Of course, he tells the story of, in a situation like this, don't try and get the best seat just so you can make yourself look good. No, it's better to choose the more humble spot. And then to get that feeling of the host coming, what are you doing sitting way down here? Let me bring you to the head table. I still have an older uncle who we had a wedding. I think my cousin was getting married about 2 or 3 years ago, and he's the elder statesman. He's the oldest guy in the room, so we often let him go through the buffet lines first, as a gesture of respect. But he's not always, aware of, social kind of functions or what he should or shouldn't be doing. So we, at their wedding reception, the buffet line is open. We say, go first, please. He goes through, gets his plate. And he's surveying, the wedding reception area. And he sees, all the round tables here, and then the long table for the bridal party. And he takes his plate and he goes over, just sits right where the bride's supposed to sit. Just starts eating. Of course, everybody in the room is like, so we walk over to him, Uncle, you're going to have to move. Of course, it wasn't like, devastating to him. He didn't care. He wasn't aware of what was going on. So he just, okay, I'll move over here. But that's sort of kind of what Jesus is saying, right? Like, there are places of prominence. And it's going to feel better for you to be exalted from a place of humility than have to take that walk of shame back up to the cheap seats, from the seat that you tried to steal. So we get that story. Notice we're told the first story is a parable, but then the second lesson that follows this is not kind of this general, abstract, bit of wisdom. It says he looks at the man that is hosting the dinner. He looks at the man that's hosting the dinner. I got a water too.
Oh, thank you.
I got plenty.
Sorry.
There's more where that came from. So Jesus looks at the man who hosts the dinner and he directly addresses him. And he says, listen, when you give a dinner, don't do it like this. What he says. It's almost like, he's kind of chiding him a little bit. He's saying, when you give a dinner, don't invite the rich people, the prominent citizens of the area. Don't give a dinner just so you can have those people in your house and, show off a little bit. Because when you feel like being generous and opening your home, be truly generous. I think that's sort of what we do sometimes. If we're going to put out, the good silver and the best china, we're going to do that for the people that we feel are important, right? It's a family gathering, it's an important holiday, or it's, you're having somebody important over. And I say that as a millennial having no china or no silver whatsoever in my house. Theoretically, if I did, that's probably what I would use it for. People we want to impress, right? People that we want to like us more. We want to impress them with how we are being, using our generosity. But think about it. If you give a lavish feast for your rich friends, what are you really doing? You're sort of elevating yourself, right? Yes, you're being generous with your resources, blessing them, all that's good. But ultimately, you want them to be impressed by you and your liberality. The more that you spend on them, the more important they're going to think that you are. And at the end of the day, ultimately, you're going to get repaid somehow. Either, invites are going to roll in to other dinners, or maybe you'll just be repaid in the way that it, elevates your status in their mind. Jesus is saying, no, you're distorting the true purpose of hospitality. You're missing the point of what it means to be generous. Generosity towards rich people is really just an opportunity for you to show off. But turning your hospitality toward the poor, the stranger, the ones who can never repay you, that's the work of the Spirit through you. That's what actual generosity is. That's compassion in action. That's what we're called to. That's what we're called to as Christians. So this isn't an indictment on anyone who doesn't invite, the lame and the sick to their next cookout. No, it's a challenge for us to be ever mindful of how we use our resources, where we focus our attention. Maybe the underlying motives or intentions with how we use our resources and our time. Is it really because I want something to come back to me? Are we allowing the compassion of God and the blessing of His Spirit to flow through us? That's the question for us this morning. Let's close in prayer. Oh, Father, as we consider true generosity, true hospitality, may we be willing to direct our time and resources to those who will never be able to repay us. those whose station in life requires mercy and grace and compassion from others. May we be tools, catalysts, the work of your Spirit. Pray all this in the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Ghost. Amen.